The doors burst open. Duke Alaric Vane stood at the center of the Royal Assembly Hall, chains gleaming at his wrists, while 300 nobles watched in silence. His own cousin read the charges aloud. Treason, conspiracy, betrayal of the crown, every word a lie. Every face in that room knew it, yet no one spoke. Behind the accusation stood years of whispers, backdoor deals, and a family that had caged him since birth. But tonight, something would break. This is the story of how a man who had everything lost it all and then took it back. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first thing you need to understand about Duke Alaric Vane is that he never wanted the title. Not when his father died. Not when the council placed the ducal ring on his finger at 17. Not when he stood in the throne room 3 months later, watching King Edris nod approvingly, as if Alaric were a prized hunting dog finally learning to sit. He was 28 now, and the ring still felt wrong. Your Grace, they're waiting. Alaric glanced up from the stack of correspondence on his desk. His secretary, a thin man named Godfrey, with nervous hands and a talent for appearing out of nowhere, hovered near the doorway. Beyond him, the hallway stretched toward the council chamber. A walk Alaric had made 1,000 times, each one feeling longer than the last. Let them wait, Alaric said. His voice came out flat, tired. They're good at it. Godfrey's face twitched. Lord Percival was quite insistent. Percival is always insistent. It's his primary skill. Alaric set down the letter he'd been pretending to read and stood, straightening the deep blue coat that marked him as Duke of the Eastern Reaches. The fabric was worth more than most families earned in a year. It felt like a uniform. Tell me, Godfrey, in your expert opinion, what fresh disaster am I walking into today? The secretary's fingers twisted together. I couldn't say, Your Grace. You could. You won't. There's a difference. With respect, without respect, Godfrey, just this once, tell me what they're angry about before I sit down in that room. A pause. Godfrey glanced over his shoulder, then back. When he spoke, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There are rumors about the northern grain shipments. Some are saying they were diverted. Others claim they never existed at all. Lord Percival has questions. Of course he did. Alaric felt something cold settle in his chest. The grain shipments had been his initiative, his attempt to ease the food shortages in the northern territories before winter hit. He'd signed every order himself, verified every route. 3,000 bushels of wheat sent north 2 weeks ago. If they were missing, someone had made them disappear. Anything else? Alaric asked. Your cousin arrived this morning. Lady Meredith. She's waiting in the south parlor. That stopped him. Meredith never came to court unless the family council sent her. She was the youngest of his father's sister's children, sharp as a knife and twice as likely to cut you if you turned your back. The family used her for delicate matters, problems that needed a softer touch before they became scandals. Perfect, Alaric muttered. Absolutely perfect. He moved past Godfrey into the hallway. The palace was built like a maze, all marble columns and vaulted ceilings designed to make visitors feel small. Alaric had grown up in these halls, and they still made him feel like he was shrinking. The council chamber doors stood open. Inside, 6 men waited around an oval table. The Duke's Council, though Alaric had stopped thinking of it as his years ago. They'd belonged to his father before him and his grandfather before that. Family retainers, all of them. Vain cousins and uncles who'd spent generations advising dukes while making sure none of those dukes ever got too comfortable with actual power. Lord Percival Vane sat at the head of the table. He was 53, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his black hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who didn't like him very much. He ran the family's finances and had since before Alaric was born. Nephew, Percival said. Not your grace. Never your grace. When they were alone. Good of you to join us. Alaric took his seat. I was finishing correspondence. Of course you were. Percival slid a ledger across the table. Perhaps you'd like to correspond about this. The ledger fell open to a page marked with a red ribbon. Alaric scanned the entries, dates, quantities, destinations. The northern grain shipments. Every number matched his records exactly, down to the last bushel, except for one column. What am I looking at? Alaric asked, though he already knew. Discrepancies, said Lord Victor, who managed the family's trade routes. He was younger than Percival, somewhere in his 40s, with the kind of face that always looked vaguely disappointed. The grain you authorized never reached the northern territories. Our contacts report the warehouses are empty. 3,000 bushels vanished. Alaric felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. That's impossible. I verified the routes myself. Did you? Percival's voice was mild, conversational, dangerous. Or did you sign what was put in front of you? The other council members shifted in their seats. None of them met Alaric's eyes. I don't sign blind, Alaric said carefully. Every shipment was logged. Every payment cleared through the duchy accounts. If the grain didn't arrive, someone intercepted it. Someone. Victor leaned forward. That's a convenient word. Very vague. Who exactly would have the authority to intercept 3,000 bushels of grain purchased with duchy funds and shipped under duchy seal? The trap closed around him with the smooth precision of long practice. They'd done this before. Cornered him with questions that had only one acceptable answer, then acted hurt when he gave it. I don't know, Alaric admitted, but I'll find out. Will you? Percival closed the ledger with a soft thump. The problem, nephew, is that this isn't the first time supplies have gone missing under your watch. Last month it was medical shipments to the southern coast. Before that, construction materials for the Eastern Bridge project. Small things, easy to overlook, but they add up. I wasn't aware. Exactly. Percival's smile didn't reach his eyes. You weren't aware. That's becoming a pattern. Lord Benedict, the family's legal advisor, cleared his throat. He was the oldest of them, nearly 70, with hands that shook when he lifted his wine glass but were steady as iron when he drafted contracts. Your Grace, perhaps it would be wise to conduct an internal review, quietly, before the King's auditors start asking questions we can't answer. The King's auditors? Alaric felt a muscle jump in his jaw. Is that a threat? It's a reality, Percival said. You live 300 feet from the throne room. Every decision you make is watched, weighed, judged. If His Majesty begins to doubt your competence, or worse, your loyalty, the consequences won't fall on you alone. They'll fall on all of us, the entire Vane family. There it was. The real concern. Not the missing grain, not the suffering northerners who'd go hungry this winter, just the family's reputation. The same calculation they'd been making since Alaric's father died and left a 17-year-old boy to fill a role he'd never wanted. Keep the duchy running. Keep the king happy. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. Above all, don't embarrass us. Alaric stood. I'll look into it. See that you do, Percival said. And nephew, next time we summon you, don't keep us waiting. The south parlor was smaller than the council chamber, which somehow made it worse. Meredith had made herself comfortable in the window seat, her dark hair pinned up in the latest court style, a book open in her lap that Alaric suspected she wasn't actually reading. She looked up when he entered. Cousin? Meredith. He closed the door behind him. Why are you here? Such warmth. I've missed you too. I'm not in the mood. She set the book aside and stood, smoothing her skirts. Meredith was 25, 3 years younger than Alaric, and had inherited the family's talent for looking decorative while plotting. She moved through court like a dancer, always one step ahead of the music. The council sent me, she said simply. They think you need guidance. Guidance. Alaric crossed to the window, looking down at the palace gardens below. Servants moved between the hedges, carrying out their duties with the same steady rhythm as always. He envied them sometimes. Is that what we're calling it? You're in trouble, Alaric. I gathered that from the interrogation I just sat through. Meredith came to stand beside him. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its playful edge. This isn't like before. The missing grain shipment, that's just the excuse. There's something bigger happening. People are talking. People are always talking. Not like this. She glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. There's a faction forming. Nobles who think you're too weak to hold the duchy. They're not saying it openly yet, but the whispers are getting louder, and some of them are coming from inside the family. Alaric's hands curled into fists on the windowsill. Who? I don't know all of them, but Percival... She hesitated. He's been taking a lot of meetings lately, private ones, with people he usually wouldn't give the time of day. Percival's always taking meetings. Not with Lord Harwick. That got his attention. Lord Harwick was one of the king's chief advisors, a political animal who'd survived 3 regime changes by always knowing which way the wind was blowing before it started. If he was meeting with Percival privately, it meant something was shifting in the court's power structure, and Alaric wasn't being told about it. "What do they want?" he asked quietly. Meredith's reflection looked back at him from the window glass. "What do they always want? Control. You're the Duke, but you don't actually run anything. The council makes the decisions. They hold the purse strings, manage the alliances, decide which battles are worth fighting. You're just the face they show the world, the title they can hide behind when things go wrong." "I know what I am." "Do you?" Her tone sharpened. "Because from where I'm standing, you've spent the last 10 years letting them turn you into exactly what Father was. A figurehead. Someone who sits in meetings and nods at the right times and doesn't ask too many questions. Is that really what you want?" Alaric turned to face her. "What I want doesn't matter." "It should." "Well, it doesn't. I didn't choose this, Meredith. The title fell on me when Father died, and I've been trying to keep it from crushing me ever since. If that makes me weak, fine. I'm weak. But at least I'm still here." She studied him for a long moment. "You sound like you're giving up." "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." The words hit harder than they should have. Alaric felt anger flash through him, hot and sudden. But when he opened his mouth to respond, nothing came out. Because she was right. He knew she was right. He'd been running in place for years, telling himself it was enough to just survive. Keep the peace, don't make waves. Let the council handle the details, while he played the part of the noble duke who cared about his people. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. He was scared. Scared of failing the way his father had, dying young and leaving chaos behind. Scared of making the wrong choice and watching people suffer for it. Scared that if he reached for real power, the family would close ranks and destroy him before he got close. Better to be controlled than to lose everything. Meredith's expression softened. "I'm not trying to hurt you, cousin. I'm trying to wake you up. Because whatever's coming, it's going to be bad. And if you're not ready, if you keep letting them make you small, you won't survive it." "Then what do you suggest?" "Fight back. Find allies who aren't blood relatives with knives behind their backs. Stop signing things blindly and start asking questions. Make them remember that you're not just a title, you're a person, and you have just as much right to power as any of them." Easier said than done. Everything worth doing is. She picked up her book and moved toward the door. "Oh, and Alaric, be careful at the king's banquet tonight. There's going to be an announcement, something about trade agreements with the northern territories. You might want to pay attention." She was gone before he could ask what she meant. Shit. King Edris III held court the way other men breathed, constantly, effortlessly, and with the absolute certainty that the world would keep turning because he willed it. His banquets were legendary, sprawling affairs that filled the great hall with hundreds of nobles, all competing for a moment of royal attention. Alaric hated them. He stood near one of the marble columns, a glass of wine in his hand that he hadn't touched, and watched the crowd swirl around him like a river flowing past a stone. Conversations rose and fell in waves. Laughter, gossip, the occasional raised voice quickly hushed. Everyone was performing. Everyone had an angle. "You look thrilled to be here," said a voice to his left. Alaric glanced over. The woman who'd appeared beside him was maybe 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid and gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She wore a dark green dress that was elegant without being showy, and she held her wine glass like someone who actually planned to drink it. He didn't recognize her. "I'm practicing my court face," Alaric said. "How am I doing?" "Terrible. You look like you're at a funeral." She took a sip of wine. "Though, to be fair, some of these banquets feel like wakes for common sense, so perhaps you're just reading the room better than the rest of us." Despite himself, Alaric smiled. "Do I know you?" "Not yet. Alaric Quinn. I work for Lord Pemberton's trade office, shipping routes, cargo manifests, the exciting world of maritime commerce." She said it with just enough irony to make it clear she knew exactly how dull it sounded. "And you're Duke Alaric Vane, which means you already regret talking to me because now I might ask you for something. Will you?" "No, I'm not that ambitious." She glanced around the hall. "Besides, Everyone here wants something from you. I figured you might appreciate 30 seconds of conversation that doesn't end with a request for favor or funding. You'd be surprised how rare that is. I wouldn't, actually. I've been watching you for the last hour. At least 9 people have cornered you, and you've had the same expression every time, somewhere between politeness and escape planning. Alaric couldn't help but laugh. You're observant. It's my job. Alara tilted her head slightly, studying him. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. Go ahead. Do you actually enjoy any of this? The politics, the maneuvering, the constant performance? Or are you just going through the motions? The question caught him off guard. Not because it was rude, it wasn't, but because it was honest in a way court conversations never were. People asked him things all the time. What he thought about trade policy, what his position was on the eastern border disputes, whether he supported this faction or that alliance. No one ever asked if he was happy. I'm not sure enjoy is the right word, Alaric said carefully. It's my responsibility. Has been since my father died, so I do it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Alara nodded slowly, as if he'd just confirmed something she'd suspected. For what it's worth, I think you're better at this than you give yourself credit for. I've been coming to these things for 3 years now, and I've watched a lot of nobles play the game. Most of them are terrible at it. They're too obvious, too hungry. You, though, you know how to wait, how to listen. That's rarer than you think. Listening is easy when no one expects you to actually do anything. Is that what they expect? Nothing? Before Alaric could answer, a bell chimed 3 times. The crowd began to quiet, turning toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where King Edris sat on a chair that wasn't quite a throne, but wasn't quite not a throne either. The king stood. Edris III was 47, tall and lean, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes that missed nothing. He'd taken the throne 15 years ago after his father's death, and he ruled with the kind of calculated precision that made him respected and feared in equal measure. My friends, Edris began, his voice carrying easily across the hall, thank you for joining us tonight. As many of you know, these past months have been challenging for our northern territories. Harsh winters, poor harvests, supply shortages. Our people have suffered, and it is our duty, all of us, to see them through these difficulties. Alaric felt a prickle of unease. This was the announcement Meredith had warned him about. To that end, Edris continued, I am pleased to announce a new trade initiative. We will be opening direct negotiations with the merchant guilds of Farwind to secure grain shipments for the north. Lord Harwick will be leading these discussions, with support from our ducal councils. Applause rippled through the crowd. Alaric kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. Grain shipments for the north, the exact thing he'd tried to arrange 2 weeks ago. The shipments that had vanished. This wasn't a coincidence. Furthermore, the king said, raising a hand for silence, I want to acknowledge the efforts of Duke Alaric Vane, who brought this crisis to our attention and worked tirelessly to address it. Your Grace, your dedication to the realm does not go unnoticed. Every eye in the hall turned toward Alaric. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, wind pushing him forward, gravel crumbling under his feet. The king was praising him for something that had failed, making him the face of a crisis he'd tried to solve but couldn't. And now Edris was swooping in with his own solution, his own people, making it clear that when things needed to actually get done, the crown would handle it. It was a masterclass in political humiliation dressed up as gratitude. Alaric bowed slightly, keeping his face blank. Your Majesty is too kind. Not at all. Edris smiled, and there was something cold in it. We all serve the realm in our own way. The king sat back down, and the crowd's attention shifted away like a tide receding. Conversations resumed. The performance continued. Alara was still standing beside him. That, she said quietly, was a knife wrapped in silk. I'm aware. Are you? She turned to look at him directly. Because if you don't start fighting back, Duke Vane, they're going to cut you to pieces so slowly you won't even realize you're bleeding until it's too late. Alaric met her gaze. Why do you care? I don't like watching good people get destroyed by bad systems. She set her wine glass on a passing servant's tray. Call it a personality flaw. But if you ever decide you want to stop playing defense and start pushing back, you should know you're not as alone as you think you are. And you're offering to help? I'm offering perspective. What you do with it is up to you. Alara glanced toward the crowd, then back. But you should know something. Those grain shipments that disappeared? They didn't vanish. They were rerouted, sold off to private buyers at a premium, and the profit buried in about 6 layers of shell transactions. I found the trail 2 days ago. Alaric's breath caught. How do you know that? Because tracking shipments is literally my job, and I'm very good at it. She pulled a small folded paper from her sleeve and pressed it into his hand. Names, dates, transaction records. Enough to prove what happened. Not enough to prove who ordered it, but it's a start. He stared at the paper. Why are you giving this to me? Because someone set you up, Duke Vane, and whoever it was, they're not done yet. Alara stepped back, melting into the crowd. Be careful who you trust, even family. She was gone before he could respond. Alaric stood alone by the pillar, the folded paper burning in his hand like evidence of a crime he hadn't committed but would be blamed for anyway. Around him, the banquet continued. Nobles laughed and drank and plotted. The king held court. The world turned. And for the first time in years, Alaric felt something other than resignation. He felt angry. What? The palace was quieter at night. Alaric walked the hallways with the paper still in his pocket, his mind turning over everything Alara had said. She was right. Someone had set him up, taken his initiative, his attempt to help people, and twisted it into a weapon. The question was who and why. His rooms were in the eastern wing, close enough to the throne room to be convenient, but far enough away to feel isolated. It had been his father's suite once. Alaric had never changed the furniture, never replaced the heavy curtains or the dark wood desk that dominated the study. He lived in his father's shadow even here. Godfrey was waiting in the anteroom. Your Grace, there's... He stopped. Are you all right? Alaric realized his hands were shaking. He forced them still. I'm fine. What is it? A letter arrived, by private courier. I was instructed to deliver it to you personally and to no one else. He held out a sealed envelope. The wax bore no crest, no identifying mark. Alaric broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. Your Grace, you have been chosen for a purpose you do not yet understand. Events are in motion that will reshape this kingdom, and you stand at the center of them, whether you wish it or not. The grain shipments were only the beginning. There are forces at work, within the court, within your own family, who see you as an obstacle to be removed. They believe you are weak, controllable. A placeholder duke who will bend rather than break. Prove them wrong. Tomorrow, Lord Percival will call an emergency council session. He will present evidence of financial irregularities in the duchy accounts, evidence that has been manufactured to implicate you directly. The goal is to force you into a position where you must either resign your authority or face formal investigation. Do not attend that meeting. Instead, go to the records hall in the administrative wing, 3rd floor, East Corridor, room 307. There you will find documents that reveal the true nature of the conspiracy against you. Take them, study them, and when you are ready, strike back. Trust no one. Question everything. A friend you have not yet met. Alaric read the letter 3 times. It could be a trap. Could be someone playing games, trying to manipulate him into making a mistake. But the details were too specific, too precise. And the mention of Percival calling an emergency council, that felt true. It felt exactly like something his uncle would do. Your Grace? Godfrey's voice was worried. What does it say? Alaric looked up at his secretary. Godfrey had served the Vane family for 20 years. He'd been loyal to Alaric's father and loyal to Alaric after him. He was careful, nervous, always worried about protocol. Could he be trusted? Could anyone? Nothing important, Alaric lied. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket alongside Alara's note. Just court business. Thank you, Godfrey. That'll be all. The secretary bowed and left. Alaric stood alone in the study, surrounded by his father's things, his father's legacy, his father's failures. For 10 years, he'd been trying to be what everyone expected, the obedient duke, the family figurehead, the man who did his duty and didn't ask questions. It hadn't saved him. It hadn't protected him. It had just made him an easier target. Alara's words echoed in his mind. If you don't start fighting back, they're going to cut you to pieces so slowly you won't even realize you're bleeding until it's too late. And the anonymous letter proved them wrong. Alaric walked to the window and looked out over the palace grounds. Somewhere out there, people were moving against him, planning, plotting, tightening the noose. He thought about the northern territories, cold and hungry, waiting for grain that would never come. He thought about the families who would suffer this winter because someone had stolen supplies meant to save them. He thought about all the small cruelties and casual corruptions that he'd witnessed over the years and done nothing about because he was too afraid, too controlled, too determined to just survive. Maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to fight. Alaric pulled both papers from his pocket, Alara's evidence and the anonymous warning. Two puzzle pieces from sources he didn't trust, offering him a chance to see the shape of something larger. The smart move would be to burn them, pretend he'd never seen them, show up to the council meeting tomorrow, and play his part like always. But he was tired of being smart. He was tired of being safe, and he was done being controlled. Tomorrow morning, before the council could corner him, he would go to room 307. He would find whatever evidence was waiting there. And then he would figure out who was trying to destroy him and why. Because Alaric Vane might be weak, might be a figurehead, might be everything his enemies thought he was. But he was still the Duke, and it was time to remind people what that meant. Outside, the palace slept. Inside, a storm was beginning to build, and at its center stood a man who'd spent 10 years running from power. Now he was about to reach for it with both hands. Alaric didn't sleep. He sat at his father's desk until the sky outside turned from black to gray. The anonymous letter spread flat before him, every word memorized. When dawn finally broke, he felt hollowed out, running on nothing but coffee and the kind of clarity that comes from knowing you're about to do something irreversible. Room 307, third floor, east corridor. He dressed carefully, dark trousers, a simple shirt, no ducal coat. If he was going to sneak through the palace like a thief, he might as well look the part. The irony wasn't lost on him. 10 years of playing by their rules, and now he was breaking into his own kingdom's records hall. The hallways were quiet at this hour. A few servants moved through the corridors with the practiced silence of people who'd learned not to be noticed. Alaric kept his head down, walking with purpose but not urgency. Just another nobleman up early. Nothing unusual. The administrative wing was older than the rest of the palace, all narrow staircases and cramped corridors built before anyone cared about grandeur. Alaric climbed to the third floor, heart hammering against his ribs. The east corridor stretched ahead of him, doors numbered in brass that had gone green with age. 307. The door was locked. Of course it was. Alaric pulled the picks from his pocket, a skill he'd learned at 16 from a stable hand who'd thought it was hilarious to teach the young Duke how to break into places. He'd never expected to actually use it. The lock gave way with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the empty hallway. Inside, room 307 was exactly what you'd expect from a record storage space. Rows of shelves packed with ledgers, filing cabinets lining the walls, dust thick enough to write your name in. Weak morning light filtered through a single window. The air smelled like old paper and secrets. Alaric closed the door behind him and stood still, listening. Nothing. He was alone. The question was what he was looking for. He started with the filing cabinets, pulling drawers open at random. Property deeds, tax assessments, census records from 3 decades ago. Nothing remotely useful. He moved to the shelves, scanning spines, looking for anything that might... A ledger caught his eye. It was newer than the others, bound in dark leather with no markings on the spine. Alaric pulled it free and opened it. Numbers. Columns of them, stretching back 18 months. Transaction records, each one coded with initials and dates. At first it looked like standard duchy business. Payments for supplies, wages, construction costs. Then he saw the pattern. Every third entry was flagged with a small notation in the margin. A symbol he recognized from his father's old books. A mark used to indicate funds that had been reallocated, moved from one account to another without official authorization. Someone had been skimming money from the duchy treasury. A lot of money. Alaric's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The amounts were staggering. 50,000 crowns here, 80,000 there, all of it vanishing into accounts marked only with initials, PV, VR, BK. Percival Vane, Victor Rain, Benedict Kane, his council, his family. They'd been stealing from him for over a year, siphoning funds and covering their tracks with paperwork designed to make him look incompetent when the discrepancies were eventually discovered. The missing grain shipments weren't a mistake. They were part of a larger operation, and Alaric had been set up to take the fall. A sound outside the door froze him in place. Footsteps. Voices. "Should be in here somewhere. 3rd floor, east corridor," Percival said. Alaric's stomach dropped. He shoved the ledger inside his shirt and looked around frantically. The room had one door, one window, no other exits. The footsteps stopped right outside. Locked. That's odd. Check if you already got here. A key rattled in the lock. Alaric moved without thinking. He crossed to the window and shoved it open, wincing at the scrape of old wood. 3 floors up. No ledge, no rope, nothing but a straight drop to the courtyard below. The door opened behind him. "Your Grace?" Alaric spun around. 2 men stood in the doorway, palace guards in royal livery, not family retainers. King's men. "Can I help you?" Alaric kept his voice level, authoritative, a duke questioning servants, not a thief caught in the act. The taller guard frowned. "Lord Percival sent us to retrieve some documents. He didn't mention you'd be here." "Lord Percival doesn't mention a lot of things." Alaric stepped away from the window, forcing himself to move casually. "I was conducting my own review of the duchy records. Is there a problem?" "No problem, Your Grace, just—" The guard's eyes dropped to Alaric's shirt, where the ledger's corner was barely visible. "Doing our job." The air in the room changed. Both guards' hands moved toward their weapons. Alaric ran. He didn't think about it, didn't plan it. He just bolted for the door, shoving past the taller guard and into the hallway. Shouts erupted behind him. Boots pounded on stone. The hallway blurred. Alaric took the stairs 3 at a time, the ledger bouncing against his ribs. Behind him, the guards were yelling for reinforcements. More footsteps joined the chase. He burst onto the 2nd floor and nearly collided with a servant carrying linens. She yelped and dropped her basket. Alaric mumbled an apology and kept running. Where could he go? His rooms would be the first place they checked. The council chambers were suicide. He needed somewhere public, somewhere they couldn't corner him without witnesses. The Great Hall. Alaric changed direction, sprinting toward the central palace. His lungs burned. His legs felt like water. Behind him, the guards were gaining ground. He crashed through the doors into the Great Hall just as the morning court session was beginning. 50 nobles turned to stare at him. Alaric stood in the doorway, gasping for air, disheveled and wild-eyed, with stolen records pressed against his chest. The guards appeared behind him, weapons half drawn, and stopped when they saw the crowd. At the far end of this hall, King Edris looked up from his conversation with Lord Harwick. "Duke Vane," the king said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. What an energetic entrance. Alaric's mind raced. He was trapped, exposed. Every eye in the room was on him, and he had about 10 seconds to explain why he was being chased through the palace by royal guards before this turned into something he couldn't talk his way out of. The truth would destroy him. The council would deny everything, produce counter-evidence, make him look like a paranoid fool grasping at conspiracy theories. But lying would be worse. He straightened up, forcing air into his lungs, and met the king's gaze. "Your Majesty," Alaric said, his voice shaking slightly. "I apologize for the disruption, but I've discovered something that requires your immediate attention." Edris's expression didn't change. "Indeed. And this discovery required you to sprint through my palace like a criminal?" "It required me to secure evidence before it disappeared." Alaric pulled the ledger from his shirt and held it up. "This is a record of financial transactions involving the duchy accounts. 18 months of embezzlement, hidden under false authorizations. Money stolen from crown-funded initiatives and funneled into private accounts." A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. Lord Percival stepped forward from the crowd. He looked calm, concerned, everything a loyal family member should be when their duke was having a public breakdown. "Nephew," Percival said gently, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." The word came out harder than Alaric intended. "No more private discussions. No more closed-door meetings where you explain away the problems I find. This is happening here, now, in front of everyone. Your Grace is clearly distressed. I'm clear-headed for the first time in years." Alaric turned back to the king. "Your Majesty, I'm accusing members of my own council of systematic theft from the duchy treasury. The evidence is in this ledger. I'm prepared to testify to— You're prepared to embarrass yourself, Percival cut in. His voice had lost its gentle tone. You come in here with wild accusations, stolen records, making claims you can't possibly prove. The transactions are coded with your initials, yours, Victor's, Benedict's. Alaric opened the ledger, holding it up so the crowd could see. Every third entry for 18 months, hundreds of thousands of crowns, reallocated without authorization. Reallocated with full authority, Percival countered. My authority as head of the Duchy Council, which, if you'd bothered to attend our meetings instead of hiding in your rooms, you would know. Those funds were moved to cover shortfalls in other areas. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. Legal according to whose approval? The Council's, which has managed the Duchy finances since before you were born. Percival's eyes were cold now. Your father understood how this worked. He trusted us to handle the details while he focused on the larger picture. But you've never trusted anyone, have you? Always suspicious, always looking for betrayal where there's only loyal service. It was beautifully done. In 30 seconds, Percival had flipped the narrative. Alaric wasn't exposing corruption. He was a paranoid duke attacking the people who'd kept his duchy running despite his incompetence. And the worst part was that some of it was true. Alaric had been hiding, had let them make decisions without him, had signed documents he barely read because it was easier than fighting. He'd given them the rope. They were just using it now. Your Majesty, Lord Harwick spoke up from beside the king. Perhaps this matter would be better resolved through formal channels, an internal audit of the duchy accounts, conducted by neutral parties. That way we can determine the facts without this spectacle. Translation. Let's bury this quietly before it becomes a scandal. Alaric felt the moment slipping away. In minutes, they'd shuffle him out of the hall, lock him in some room with family members who'd explain very patiently why he needed to drop this. The ledger would disappear, the evidence would be explained away, and he'd be right back where he started, controlled, powerless, a figurehead duke who'd just proven he couldn't handle the pressure. I have more than the ledger, Alaric heard himself say. Percival's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was there. I have transaction records showing the grain shipments meant for the Northern Territories were rerouted and sold to private buyers. I have documentation proving the medical supplies that went missing were part of the same scheme. And I have testimony from sources inside the trade office who can verify every word. He was bluffing. Sort of. Alara had given him documentation, but he had no idea how complete it was. And she certainly hadn't agreed to testify publicly. But Percival didn't know that. You're lying, his uncle said flatly. Am I? Because you seem worried. I'm concerned for your mental state. You're making wild claims, grasping at shadows. Then prove me wrong. Alaric took a step forward. Open the accounts. All of them. Let the king's auditors examine every transaction from the last 2 years. If I'm wrong, I'll resign my title. But if I'm right, if there's even a shred of proof that you've been stealing from the duchy while setting me up to take the fall, then you'll face consequences. The hall had gone completely silent. King Edris watched them both with the expression of a man watching a chess game he found mildly interesting. After a long moment, he spoke. An audit seems reasonable. Percival's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, unless there's some reason to refuse transparency. Edris's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath it. The Duke has made serious accusations. They should be investigated properly. Of course, Your Majesty, I have nothing to hide, but the disruption to duchy operations will be minimal, I'm sure. The king stood. Lord Harwick, arrange for the audit to begin immediately. Duke Vane, you will cooperate fully and provide all evidence you claim to possess. Lord Percival, you and the council will make yourselves available for questioning. It wasn't a request. Percival bowed stiffly. As Your Majesty commands. But when he looked at Alaric, his eyes promised murder. The crowd began to disperse, whispers spreading like wildfire. Alaric stood alone in the center of the hall, still holding the ledger, feeling like he'd just jumped off a cliff and was waiting to see if he'd sprout wings before hitting the ground. A hand touched his elbow. Alora Quinn stood beside him, dressed in the same practical style as the night before, her expression unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid, she said quietly. I'm still deciding which. Come with me. Now. before your family decides to have a private word with you." She steered him toward a side exit, moving quickly but not obviously fleeing. They slipped through a servant's corridor and out into a small courtyard Alaric had forgotten existed. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Saving your life, apparently." Elara pulled him behind a stone fountain. "Do you have any idea what you just did in there?" "I exposed them. You declared war. On your own family. In front of the king and half the court." She looked at him like he'd gone insane. "They won't let this go, Alaric. You just made yourself the most dangerous person in that palace. They were already planning to destroy me. You said so yourself. Planning and executing are different things. You just forced their hand. Now they have to move against you immediately, before the audit reveals anything. Which means you need protection, allies, and a plan, none of which you currently have." Alaric leaned against the fountain, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. His hands were shaking again. "I know." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you just bet everything on evidence you haven't fully reviewed and testimony I never agreed to provide. You said you'd help." "I said I'd give you perspective, not commit professional suicide." Elara ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. "I work for the trade office, Alaric. If I testify against a ducal council, I'll be unemployable. Worse, I'll be a target." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Stop apologizing and start thinking." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I made copies. 3 full sets of the shipping manifests, transaction records, everything I found. One's hidden in my office, one's with someone I trust outside the palace, and one's here." She pressed the papers into his hands. "Why?" Alaric asked. "Because you're right. About the corruption, the conspiracy, all of it. I've been watching these people steal and scheme for 3 years, and nobody's had the spine to challenge them. But you did. Probably because you're too stubborn or too naive to know better, but you did it." She met his eyes. "So, yes, I'll testify. I'll give them every detail. But you need to understand, once I do that, there's no going back for either of us." Alaric looked down at the documents in his hands. Proof. Real, tangible proof that he wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't imagining the walls closing in. "There's someone else," he said suddenly. "Someone who warned me this was coming. They sent me a letter last night, told me about Percival's plan, directed me to that room." "Who?" "I don't know. It was anonymous. But they knew things. Specific things about the council's next moves." Elara frowned. "You have an unknown ally feeding you intelligence?" "Apparently. That's either very good or very bad." "I'm aware." A bell chimed somewhere in the palace. Elara tensed. "You need to go. Find somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't think to look for you." "Where?" "I don't know. But not your rooms. Definitely not the family wing." She paused. "There's a boarding house in the lower city, the Silver Bell. Tell the owner that Quinn sent you. She'll give you a room, no questions." "You want me to hide in the lower city?" "I want you alive long enough to see this through." Elara stepped back. "Go. I'll send word when the auditors are ready to interview you. Until then, keep your head down and trust no one." She disappeared into the servants' corridor before he could respond. Alaric stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by evidence of crimes he still didn't fully understand, committed by people who'd raised him, taught him, controlled him. His entire adult life. He thought about his father, dying at 42, worn down by the weight of a title he'd never escaped. Had he known? Had he seen the corruption and decided it was easier to live with it than fight it? Alaric would never know. But he knew what he had to do next. He tucked the documents inside his shirt, pulled his collar up, and headed for the lower city. The Silver Bell turned out to be a narrow building squeezed between a bakery and a cobbler's shop, 3 stories of weathered stone and crooked shutters. The owner was a woman named Iris, somewhere in her 50s, with sharp eyes and hands that looked like they'd seen hard work. "Quinn sent you?" she asked, looking Alaric up and down. "She said you'd have a room." "Might. Depends on what you're running from." "Family trouble," Iris snorted. "Aren't we all? Come on." The room was small, barely large enough for a bed and a chair, but it was clean and the lock on the door looked solid. Alaric paid her a week in advance and locked himself inside. Then he spread Alara's documents across the bed and started reading. By the time the sun set, he understood 3 things. First, the conspiracy was bigger than he'd thought. It wasn't just his council. There were at least a dozen nobles involved, all working together to skim money from duchy operations and split the profits. The amounts were staggering, close to 2 million crowns over 18 months. Second, they'd been planning to remove him for at least 6 months. There were coded references to the succession question and alternative arrangements. They'd been building a case to have him declared incompetent, probably so they could install a regent, someone they controlled completely. Third, Lord Harwick was part of it. That was the detail that made Alaric's blood run cold. Harwick was the king's advisor, the man Idris trusted for counsel on matters of state. If he was involved in the conspiracy, then the king himself might be. No. Alaric stopped that thought before it could finish forming. He couldn't afford to suspect everyone. Not yet. A knock at the door made him jump. "It's me!" Alara's voice called. Alaric opened the door. She slipped inside, looking tired. "The audit starts tomorrow," she said. "They'll interview you first. Be ready." "I will be. There's something else." She hesitated. "Percival called an emergency family meeting tonight. My contact in the household says it got heated. Your cousin Meredith defended you, said you were right to demand transparency. They shouted her down, but she didn't back off." Alaric felt something loosen in his chest. At least he had one ally in the family. "What did Percival say?" "That you'd left him no choice. That you'd forced his hand." Alara's expression was grim. "Alaric, he's going to come after you with everything he has. Legal challenges, character assassination, whatever it takes. And he won't stop until you're destroyed. Then I'll have to destroy him first." The words hung in the air between them. Alara studied him for a long moment. "You've changed. Since last night, you sound different." "I feel different." Alaric looked down at the document spread across the bed. "I spent 10 years being afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of what would happen if I actually tried to use the power I supposedly had. But I'm done with that. Whatever happens next, at least I'll know I fought back. Even if you lose everything? I already lost everything that mattered. My freedom, my self-respect, my ability to help the people who depend on me." He met her eyes. "What's left to lose?" Alara smiled slightly. "Your life, for starters." "Details," she laughed, surprising both of them. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless." Still deciding which. "Well, let me know when you figure it out." She moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "Alara?" Alaric stopped her. "Thank you for all of this. You didn't have to help me." "Yes, I did." She looked back at him. "Someone had to." After she left, Alaric lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above him, the palace glittered with candlelight and scheming nobles. His family was plotting his downfall. His uncle wanted him destroyed. The king was watching everything with detached interest, waiting to see who'd win before choosing sides. And Alaric was hiding in a boarding house in the lower city with stolen documents and a handful of allies he barely knew. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt almost free. For the first time in 10 years, he was making his own choices, fighting his own battles. Win or lose, succeed or fail, at least it would be his decision. The anonymous letter writer had been right about one thing. Events were in motion. Forces were gathering. And Alaric stood at the center of it all, no longer a pawn but a player. Tomorrow, the audit would begin. Questions would be asked, evidence would be examined, and one way or another, the truth would come out. Alaric closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Outside, in the darkness of the lower city, someone else was watching the silver bell. Waiting. Planning. And in the palace above, Percival Vane sat in his study with a glass of wine and a decision that couldn't be unmade. The game had changed. His nephew had forced it to change. Now Percival would show him what happened to dukes who forgot their place. The wine in Percival's glass caught the lamplight, dark as old blood. He'd been sitting in the same chair for an hour, watching the liquid shift and settle while his mind worked through possibilities, contingencies, the careful architecture of controlled demolition. His nephew had become a problem that required permanent solutions. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Victor entered without waiting for permission, his face tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk about damage control," Victor said, closing the door behind him. "Half the court is whispering about embezzlement. The king's auditors arrive tomorrow morning, and your nephew is apparently hiding somewhere in the city with evidence that could what? Percival set down his glass. Prove that we moved money around? We've been doing that for decades. It's called financial management. It's called theft when the Duke doesn't authorize it. The Duke is a child playing at authority. Percival stood, moving to the window. Below, the palace grounds stretched out in geometric precision, every hedge trimmed, every path measured, order imposed on chaos. His father understood the arrangement. Sign what we put in front of him, attend the ceremonies, let us handle the complicated decisions. Alaric would have had the same comfortable life if he'd just followed the same pattern. Instead, he's declared war on us in front of the entire court. Then we end the war quickly. Percival turned to face his cousin. I've already spoken with Harwick. The king can be convinced that Alaric is unstable, paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there's only standard duchy business. A few well-placed testimonies from concerned family members, medical opinions from royal physicians, evidence of erratic behavior. You want to have him declared incompetent. I want to save the family from his recklessness. Percival's voice hardened. He's spiraling, Victor, making wild accusations, stealing records, running through the palace like a madman. The kindest thing we can do is remove him from a position he clearly can't handle before he destroys everything our family built. Victor was quiet for a moment. And if he fights it, how? He's alone. No allies, no support, just a handful of documents and a trade clerk who's already marked herself as unemployable. Percival picked up his wine again. We control the narrative. We always have. He has Meredith. That name landed like a stone in still water. Percival's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Meredith is young and idealistic. She'll understand once this is over. She defended him tonight, in front of the entire family council, called us cowards for not supporting him. Then she'll learn the same lesson Alaric is learning. Percival drained his glass. Idealism is a luxury for people who don't have to make hard choices. We do. And tomorrow, we make the hardest one. Victor left without another word. Percival stood alone in his study, surrounded by ledgers and contracts and the carefully documented evidence of 15 years spent keeping the Vane family powerful while its titular head played at being Duke. He'd done what was necessary, what his father had done, and his father before him. The family survived because the council made sure it survived, regardless of which incompetent or idealistic fool wore the ducal ring. Alaric would understand eventually, or he wouldn't. Either way, he'd be gone. The auditors arrived at dawn. Alaric watched from the window of his boarding house room as official carriages rolled through the palace gates. 3 of them, each one bearing the king's seal. Lord Harwick had moved fast. Nervous? Alaric stood behind him, holding 2 cups of coffee that smelled like burnt wood and tasted worse. Terrified, Alaric took one of the cups anyway. What if they don't find anything? What if Percival's already cleaned up the evidence? Then we show them what we found. Force them to dig deeper. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. But that's not what you're really afraid of, is it? He turned to face her. What do you mean? You're afraid they'll find everything, prove you were right, and then you'll have to watch your own family get arrested for treason. Alara's gray eyes were steady, unflinching. That's the price of the truth, Alaric. Sometimes it costs more than lies would have. I know. Do you? Because there's still time to walk away. Go to the auditors, tell them you made a mistake, that you were stressed and seeing patterns that weren't there. Percival would probably even forgive you. Eventually, you could go back to being the controlled duke who doesn't ask questions. Is that what you think I should do? I think you should know what you're choosing. She set down her coffee. I've been digging into the conspiracy since you went public yesterday. It's worse than we thought. The network goes deeper, not just your council, but magistrates, trade officials, even some of the king's inner circle. If you pull this thread, the whole fabric starts to unravel, and powerful people don't like watching their world fall apart. Alaric absorbed that, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. How much does the king know? That's the question, isn't it? Alara stood, pacing the small room. Either Idris is complicit, which makes this an impossible fight, or he's being manipulated, which makes him dangerous in a different way. A king who realizes he's been played doesn't usually respond with gratitude. Then we need to be careful about what we show him. We need to stay alive long enough to show him anything. She stopped pacing and looked at him directly. I got word this morning. Someone tried to break into my office last night. Didn't take anything, probably because I'd already moved the documents. But the message was clear. They're coming after you now. They're coming after both of us. We're liabilities. Alara's voice was calm, matter of fact, but Alaric could see the tension in her shoulders. Which means we need to move faster than they do. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Alaric moved quietly to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. A woman's voice, familiar. Alaric, I know you're in there. Open up. Meredith. He unlocked the door. His cousin slipped inside, dressed in traveling clothes, her hair hidden under a hooded cloak. She looked exhausted. How did you find me? Alaric asked. I followed Quinn yesterday. Wasn't hard. She's not exactly trained in counter-surveillance. Meredith pulled back her hood, looking between them. We need to talk. Now. If you're here to convince me to back down, I'm here to help you survive the next 24 hours. She cut him off. The family's planning something. I don't know exactly what, but Percival's been in meetings all night with people he normally wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Lawyers, physicians, palace security. He's building a case. Against me? To have you removed, declared incompetent, dangerous to yourself and others. Meredith's eyes were fierce. They're going to paint you as mentally unstable, Alaric. Use your public breakdown yesterday as evidence. Testimony from family members about erratic behavior, paranoid delusions. By the time they're done, the king won't have a choice but to put you under family supervision. Alara swore under her breath. That's brilliant. Horrifying, but brilliant. They don't have to prove he's wrong, just that he's unfit. How long do I have? Alaric asked. The auditors are scheduled to interview you at noon. That's when they'll make their move, bring in physicians, present their case. Have you evaluated on the spot? Meredith grabbed his arm. You can't go to that meeting. The moment you walk into that room, they'll trap you. If I don't show up, they'll use that as more evidence that I'm unstable. And if you do show up, they'll have you declared incompetent before the sun sets. She squeezed harder. There's no winning move here, cousin. Not the way they've set it up. Alaric pulled away, his mind racing. She was right. Percival had boxed him in perfectly. Appear at the audit and get destroyed on the spot, or hide and prove their point about his mental state. Either way, he lost, unless he changed the game entirely. What if I don't go to the auditors? Alaric said slowly. What if I go to the king instead? Alara's eyes widened. That's insane. Exactly. They're expecting me to play by the rules. Show up where I'm told, answer the questions I'm asked, wait for the system to decide my fate. But I'm a duke. I have the right to request private audience with the king. Percival can't stop that without showing his hand. He doesn't need to stop it. He just needs to be in the room when it happens. Meredith shook her head. Harwick controls the king's schedule. Any meeting you request will be filtered through him. Then I don't request. Alaric felt something clicking into place, a plan forming from desperation and fury. I walk into the throne room during public petitions and demand to be heard, in front of the entire court. They can't claim I'm hiding, can't control the narrative, and the king will have to respond. That's not insane, Alara said quietly. That's suicide. You have a better idea? She didn't answer. Meredith looked between them, then let out a long breath. If you're going to do this, you need more than just accusations. You need proof they can't explain away. Documents are good, but they'll claim forgery or misinterpretation. You need something undeniable. Like what? Witnesses. People who were part of the conspiracy but are willing to talk. Turn one of them, get them to testify publicly, and the whole thing falls apart. She paused. I know someone. Lord Benedict's clerk. A man named Thomas who's been keeping duplicates of everything that crosses Benedict's desk for the last 5 years. Insurance, he calls it, in case the family ever tries to make him a scapegoat. Will he talk? For the right price and the right protection, maybe. But you'd have to move fast. Once Percival realizes Thomas exists, he'll disappear. Alaric looked at Alara. Can you get to him? I can try. Where is he? Lower City, near the eastern docks. There's a scriptorium called the Inkwell. He works there under a false name. Meredith pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. This is the address. But be careful. If they're watching you, they'll follow you straight to him. Alara took the paper. I'll lose them first. She was out the door before Alaric could say anything else. The room felt smaller with just him and Meredith. His cousin sat heavily on the bed, looking more tired than he'd ever seen her. Why are you helping me? Alaric asked. You could stay out of this. Keep your position in the family. Let me burn alone. Because you're right. She looked up at him. About the corruption, the control, all of it. I've watched them do this my entire life, turn people into puppets and call it tradition. Your father, my mother, every duke or duchess who thought they had power when really they just had a title and a target on their back. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't want that to be my life, and I don't want it to be yours either. They'll come after you for this. Let them try. She stood, straightening her shoulders. I'm not as easy to control as they think. None of us are. Meredith smiled slightly. No, I suppose we're not. She left through the back exit, disappearing into the warren of lower city streets with the ease of someone who'd been sneaking around the palace for years. Alaric was alone. He spent the next 2 hours preparing, changed into the formal clothes Meredith had brought, his ducal coat perfectly tailored, the deep blue that marked him as nobility. Reviewed the documents until he had every detail memorized, practiced what he'd say to the king, running through arguments and counter-arguments, trying to anticipate every way Percival might twist his words. By the time the clock struck 11, he was as ready as he'd ever be. The walk back to the palace felt like marching toward execution. The throne room was already full when Alaric arrived. Public petitions were a monthly tradition. Any subject could bring grievances before the king, request judgments, seek royal intervention in disputes. It was supposed to be a demonstration of accessible justice. In practice, it was theater. Most petitions were dismissed or referred to lower courts. The real decisions happened in private, away from the crowd. But the crowd was exactly what Alaric needed. He pushed through the gathered nobles and merchants, ignoring the whispers that followed him like a wake. At the front of the room, King Edris sat on his throne, looking bored while a merchant argued about import tariffs. Lord Harwick stood beside the throne, leaning in occasionally to whisper in the king's ear. Alaric waited until the merchant's petition was denied, then stepped forward before the next case could be called. Your Majesty, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, I request to be heard. Idris looked up, genuine surprise crossing his face. Duke Vane, I thought you'd be with my auditors. I came to speak with you instead, about matters that concern the security of this kingdom. Harwick moved smoothly forward. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. If you have concerns about the audit, I'm not talking about the audit. Alaric kept his eyes on the king. I'm talking about treason. The word landed like a thunderclap. The crowd erupted in whispers. Guards shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Harwick's expression went carefully blank. Edris held up one hand and the room fell silent. That's a serious accusation, Duke Vane. I assume you have evidence to support it? I do, Your Majesty. Alaric pulled the documents from inside his coat. Evidence of systematic embezzlement from duchy accounts, funds diverted from crown-supported initiatives, falsified records designed to conceal theft. The conspiracy involves members of my own council and extends into the royal administration. More paranoid accusations, Percival's voice cut through the tension. Alaric turned to see his uncle pushing through the crowd. Your Majesty, I apologize for my nephew's behavior. As his family, we've been concerned about his mental state for some time. These delusions of conspiracy are backed by documented transactions spanning 18 months, Alaric interrupted. Names, dates, amounts, all of it verifiable through independent audit. Forgeries, most likely, created to justify his increasingly erratic behavior. Percival moved to stand beside Harwick, a unified front. Your Majesty, we had hoped to handle this quietly, but Duke Vane's condition has deteriorated rapidly. For his own safety and the safety of the realm, we believe he requires medical evaluation and possibly removal from his position until he recovers. I'm not sick. Alaric's voice rose. I'm exposing crimes that you've been committing for years. Crimes that you're trying to cover up by painting me as insane. No one is suggesting you're insane, nephew, just overwhelmed. The pressures of the duchy, combined with your natural inclination toward suspicion, my inclination toward noticing when 2 million crowns disappear from accounts I'm responsible for. The number hung in the air. Edris leaned forward slightly. 2 million crowns is not a small sum. No, Your Majesty, it's not. Alaric stepped closer. And the people who stole it are standing in this room right now, trying to discredit me before the truth comes out. Your Majesty, Harwick interjected smoothly, perhaps we should move this discussion to a private setting. These accusations are serious enough to warrant careful investigation, not public spectacle. They warrant both. Alaric didn't look away from the king. I'm not asking for justice in private, where it can be managed and controlled. I'm asking for it here, in front of witnesses, where the truth has to matter more than politics. Edris studied him for a long moment. The king's face was unreadable, giving nothing away. Lord Harwick, Edris said finally, you've been coordinating with the auditors. What have they found so far? The preliminary review shows some irregularities in duchy accounts, Your Majesty. Nothing conclusive yet. The full audit will take several days. And these irregularities, do they support Duke Vane's claims? A pause. Harwick chose his words carefully. They suggest that further investigation is warranted. Translation: yes, they found something, but we haven't figured out how to spin it yet. Alaric felt a flicker of hope. Then the throne room doors burst open. A royal guard entered, moving quickly toward the throne. He leaned in, whispering urgently to Harwick. Whatever he said made the advisor's face go pale. Your Majesty, Harwick said quietly, there's been an incident in the lower city, a fire at a scriptorium called the Inkwell. Multiple casualties. Alaric's blood turned to ice. Thomas. Alara had gone to find Thomas. Casualties? Edris frowned. What kind of fire? Arson, apparently. Someone barricaded the doors and set the building ablaze. Only a few survivors. Harwick's eyes flickered to Alaric. Among the dead was a clerk named Thomas Aldrich, formerly employed by the Vane family council. The room spun. Thomas was dead. The witness who could have corroborated everything, who had 5 years of duplicated records, who could have blown the whole conspiracy wide open, gone. And Alara had been on her way to meet him. I need to leave, Alaric heard himself say. Right now. You're not leaving anywhere, Percival said flatly. Your Majesty, this is clearly connected to Duke Vane's delusions. A clerk dies in a fire, and immediately he sees conspiracy. That clerk had evidence, Alaric shouted. Evidence that would have proven everything I've said, and now he's conveniently dead, along with anyone who could testify against you. You're suggesting I murdered someone? Percival's voice was dangerous. Based on what? Your paranoid fantasies? Based on the fact that every person who tries to help me expose you ends up dead or discredited. Enough. Edris stood, and the room went silent. This situation has clearly escalated beyond public petition. Duke Vane, you will remain in the palace under guard until we determine what actually happened. Lord Percival, you and your council will make yourselves available for questioning. And someone find out if there were any other casualties in that fire. Alaric barely heard him. His mind was racing, calculating. Alara had left the boarding house 2 hours ago. The scriptorium was maybe 30 minutes away. If she'd gotten there before the fire started, if she'd been inside when they barricaded the doors, he had to find her, had to know if she was alive. Your Majesty, please, I need to— You need to do as you're told, Idris interrupted. For once in your life, Duke Vane, follow orders and let the proper authorities handle this. Guards moved forward, surrounding him. Not quite an arrest, but close enough. Percival was watching him with an expression that might have been pity if Alaric didn't know better. This is for your own good, nephew. You'll see that eventually. Alaric let them lead him away because he had no choice. But as they walked through the corridors toward the guest quarters that would serve as his gilded cage, one thought burned through everything else. Alara had gone to that scriptorium because of him, had put herself in danger because she believed in what he was trying to do. If she was dead, it was his fault. And if she wasn't, if by some miracle she'd survived, then she was out there alone, hunted by people who'd just proven they were willing to murder anyone who got in their way. The guards locked him in a suite of rooms that were comfortable enough to not be called a cell, but locked enough to serve the same purpose. 2 men stationed outside the door, windows that overlooked a courtyard 3 stories down. Alaric paced like a caged animal, mind churning through options. He could wait, hope the auditors found something, trust the system to work. Or he could accept that the system was rigged, had always been rigged, and the only way out was through. An hour passed. Then 2. then a knock at the door. The guard opened it to admit Meredith, carrying a basket that supposedly held food. The guard inspected it briefly, found nothing suspicious, and let her through. The moment the door closed, Meredith set down the basket and pulled out a bundle of rope. "What are you doing?" Alaric asked. "Getting you out of here." She moved to the window. "Alara's alive. I found her in the lower city. She's hurt, but she'll survive. And she has something Thomas gave her before he died." "What?" "I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. Said she'd only give it to you directly." Meredith tested the window latch. "But we need to move fast. Percival knows she survived. He's got people searching every inch of the lower city. They'll know I escaped. I'll be a fugitive." "You're already a prisoner, Alaric. The only difference is whether you accept it." She looked at him. "Your choice. Stay here and hope the king eventually decides to listen, or come with me and finish what you started." Alaric looked at the rope, the window, the locked door behind him. 10 years he'd played by their rules, 10 years of being controlled, managed, kept in his place. It was time to break the pattern. "Let's go." Meredith tied the rope to the bed frame and threw it out the window. 3 floors down. Can you make it?" "I'll have to." He went first, the rough hemp cutting into his palms as he lowered himself hand over hand. His shoulders screamed, his arms shook, but he kept going, refusing to look down, focusing only on the next grip, the next foot of rope. When he hit the ground, Meredith was right behind him. They ran through the palace gardens, keeping to the shadows, moving like thieves through the place Alaric had called home his entire life. Behind them, shouts erupted. The guards had discovered his escape. Ahead, the city waited, dark, dangerous, and full of people who wanted him dead. Alaric ran anyway. Because somewhere in those streets, Alara was hiding with evidence that could change everything, and he'd be damned if he let his family's conspiracy claim one more life. The hunt was on. The lower city smelled like smoke and desperation. Alaric and Meredith moved through narrow alleys where the palace's marble grandeur gave way to crumbling brick and rotting wood. Street vendors were closing up shop for the night, their wares disappearing into carts and bags. A few looked up as they passed, eyes narrowing at Meredith's expensive cloak, but nobody stopped them. "How much further?" Alaric's lungs burned from running. "2 more blocks. There's a warehouse near the docks, abandoned mostly. Alara's hiding there." Meredith pulled her hood lower. "But we need to be careful. Percival's got men everywhere. I saw at least 3 patrols on my way to the palace." They turned a corner and nearly walked straight into 2 guards wearing Vane family colors. Alaric grabbed Meredith and pulled her into a doorway, pressing against the shadows. The guards walked past, talking in low voices about search patterns and rewards for information. When their footsteps faded, Alaric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That was close," Meredith whispered. "Too close. They're hunting us like criminals." "You are a criminal now. You escaped royal custody." She gave him a grim smile. "Welcome to life outside the cage, cousin." They reached the warehouse 10 minutes later. It was a massive structure built against the waterfront, its walls streaked with rust and salt damage. Most of the windows were broken. The loading dock doors hung crooked on their hinges. Meredith led him around to a side entrance that looked like it hadn't been used in years. She knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door opened a crack. Alara's face appeared, pale and drawn. "You brought him," she said, relief flooding her voice. "Barely. Half the city's looking for us." Meredith pushed inside, pulling Alaric after her. The warehouse interior was cavernous and dark, lit only by a few candles scattered on crates. In the flickering light, Alaric could see Alara more clearly. Her left arm was wrapped in makeshift bandages, and there was a burn mark on her cheek. Soot stained her clothes. "What happened?" Alaric moved toward her, but she held up a hand. "I got to the scriptorium maybe 5 minutes before they torched it. Thomas was already dead. They'd killed him first, made it look like he died in the fire. But he'd hidden something, left me a message." She reached into her coat and pulled out a leather satchel, scorched at the edges. "This." Alaric took it carefully. Inside were documents, dozens of them, some singed but readable. He pulled one out and held it up to the candlelight. It was a contract, signed by Lord Percival Vane and countersigned by Lord Harwick, dated 8 months ago. The terms were buried in legal language, but the essence was clear. a private agreement to redirect duchy grain supplies to specific merchants in exchange for a percentage of the profits. The missing shipments weren't a mistake. They were a business arrangement. There's more, Alara said quietly. Letters between Harwick and your council discussing the Alaric problem. How to isolate you, discredit you, eventually remove you. They've been planning this for over a year. Alaric flipped through the documents, his hands shaking. Here it was. Everything he'd suspected, everything they'd denied, laid out in their own handwriting. Proof that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as forgery. Thomas copied everything that crossed Benedict's desk, Alara continued. Every contract, every letter, every piece of correspondence between the council and the nobles they were working with. He was terrified they'd eventually kill him to cover their tracks, so he documented everything as insurance. Didn't help him much, Meredith said bitterly. No, but it might help us. Alaric looked up at Alara. How bad are you hurt? I'll live. Got out through a back window before the whole building went up. Smoke inhalation, some burns. Nothing that'll stop me from seeing this through. Her gray eyes were fierce despite the exhaustion. They killed Thomas right in front of me, Alaric. Stabbed him and left him to burn. I'm not letting that go unanswered. Neither am I. Alaric carefully returned the documents to the satchel. But we need to be smart about this. If we just take these to the king, Harwick will intercept them. He controls access, controls the narrative. We need a different approach. What are you thinking? Meredith asked. I'm thinking we stop playing defense and start attacking. Alaric began pacing, the pieces clicking together in his mind. Percival and Harwick have power because they operate in shadows. Private meetings, secret deals, conversations that never get recorded. But what if we dragged everything into the light? The Royal Assembly, Alara said slowly. You want to expose them during the assembly. The Royal Assembly happened once a month. A formal gathering where the king heard reports from his advisors, received petitions from the nobility, and made official pronouncements. It was the most public, most witnessed event in the political calendar. Every noble of importance attended. Every word spoken was recorded by royal scribes. It's in 2 days, Meredith said, and you're a fugitive. How exactly do you plan to walk into the throne room without being arrested on sight? I don't walk in. I'm already there. Alaric turned to face them. The assembly has protocols. Any duke can request to address the king on matters of duchy business. It's tradition, dating back centuries. They can't refuse me without cause. They'll say you're mentally unstable. Under investigation. A fugitive from royal custody. Then I force them to say it publicly. Make them accuse me in front of the entire court, with witnesses and scribes recording every word. Alaric felt the plan solidifying, risky but possible. If they try to silence me, it proves I'm right. If they let me speak, I present the evidence. Either way, we win. Or we all get arrested and executed for treason, Alara pointed out. Details. Despite everything, she smiled slightly. You're getting bolder, Duke Vane. I'm getting desperate. There's a difference. He looked at the satchel. But these documents, this is real leverage. Thomas died protecting them. We owe it to him to make sure they matter. So what's the plan? Meredith asked. We can't just stroll into the assembly. Percival will have guards everywhere. No, but you can. Alaric turned to his cousin. You're still family, still trusted, as far as they know. You attend the assembly like normal. During the session, when petitions are being heard, you stand up and request that Duke Alaric Vane be allowed to address the court on matters of duchy security. They'll refuse. Probably. But you keep pushing. Make a scene. Force them to either grant the request or publicly deny a duke's right to petition. Either response gives us an opening. And while I'm doing that, I'll already be in the throne room, disguised, hidden among the crowd. When they refuse you, or when they reluctantly agree, I reveal myself and present the evidence before they can stop me. Alara shook her head. That's insane. You'll be surrounded by guards loyal to the crown. The moment you show your face, they'll grab you. Not if I'm fast enough. Not if the evidence is damning enough that arresting me becomes politically impossible. Alaric met her eyes. You said it yourself. Powerful people don't like watching their world fall apart. If we can make Harwick and Percival's conspiracy undeniable in front of hundreds of witnesses, the king will have to act. He can't ignore treason committed in his own court. He can if he's part of it, Meredith said quietly. That was the risk they couldn't fully account for. If King Edris was complicit, If he'd known about the corruption and allowed it, then everything Alaric was planning would just get them killed faster. But Alaric didn't think the king knew. Idris was calculating, ruthless when necessary, but he wasn't stupid. Allowing his advisors to steal millions and destabilize duchy operations made him look weak. And weak kings didn't stay kings for long. We proceed as if he's being manipulated, Alaric decided. Give him a chance to do the right thing. If he doesn't, then we're all dead anyway, so it won't matter, Alara finished. Wonderful plan. You have a better one? She didn't. They spent the next hour planning details. Meredith would return to the palace, play her role as concerned family member worried about her unstable cousin. She'd attend the assembly as scheduled, wait for the right moment, then make her petition. Alaric would need a disguise, something that would let him blend into the crowd of minor nobles and merchants who filled the back of the throne room during assemblies. Alara knew a costumer in the lower city who owed her a favor, someone discreet enough to not ask questions. The biggest risk was getting the documents into the throne room without them being discovered. Palace guards searched everyone entering during assemblies, looking for weapons. A satchel full of incriminating evidence would be found immediately. We need someone to bring them in separately, Alara said. Someone above suspicion who won't be searched. Who? Alaric asked. I might know someone, Meredith said slowly. Lady Ashford. She's ancient, practically deaf, and everyone treats her like a harmless relic. She attends every assembly because she's been doing it for 50 years, and nobody has the heart to tell her to stop. Guards wave her through without a second look. Will she help us? She hates Percival. He tried to force her off some land she owns near the eastern border. She's been looking for a way to get back at him for years. Meredith smiled. I think she'd enjoy smuggling treasonous documents into the throne room. It was a thin thread to hang their lives on, but it was something. Meredith left first, disappearing into the night with promises to arrange everything. Alaric and Alara stayed in the warehouse, surrounded by shadows and the sound of water lapping against the docks. Are you scared? Alara asked after a while. Terrified. Good. That means you're thinking clearly. She adjusted the bandage on her arm, wincing. For what it's worth, I think this might actually work. Yeah? Yeah, Percival's gotten comfortable, sloppy. He thinks he's untouchable because he's always been untouchable. But you're not playing the game he expects. That gives us an edge. Alaric sat down on a crate across from her. Why are you doing this, really? You could have walked away after the fire. Disappeared. Changed your name and started over somewhere they'd never find you. Alara was quiet for a moment. My father was a magistrate. Good man, honest, believed in the system. When I was 15, he discovered that one of the noble families in his district was running a smuggling operation, avoiding tariffs, bribing inspectors, the usual corruption. He reported it, followed proper channels, did everything by the book. What happened? They destroyed him, planted evidence that made it look like he was the one taking bribes, stripped his position, threw him in prison. He died there 6 months later. Her voice was flat, emotionless in the way that comes from old pain. I spent the next 10 years learning how their system works, how they protect each other, how they make inconvenient people disappear, and I swore that if I ever got a chance to tear it down, I would. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Help me finish this. She looked at him directly. That's why I'm here, Alaric, not because I believe in you specifically, but because you're the first person with actual power who's been willing to fight back. And if we can make this work, if we can prove that the system can be challenged, maybe my father's death meant something. Alaric didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the city settle into its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere out there, Percival was hunting them. Guards were searching streets. The machinery of power was grinding away, trying to crush them before they could become a real threat. But for the first time since this started, Alaric felt like they had a chance. A real chance. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Alaric stayed hidden in the warehouse while Alara went out to make arrangements. She returned near sunset with a bundle of clothes. Servant's livery, plain and forgettable. The kind worn by 100 different people in the palace every day. Best I could do on short notice, she said, tossing the bundle to him. The costumer says if you keep your head down and don't make eye contact, you should blend in fine. Alaric held up the rough brown jacket. I look like a servant? You look like someone nobody notices, which is the point. She also brought news. Meredith had made contact with Lady Ashford, who'd agreed to help with barely concealed glee. The old woman apparently had a flair for intrigue and was treating the whole thing like a grand adventure. She'd bring the documents into the assembly hidden in her voluminous skirts, then pass them to Alaric at a predetermined signal. "What's the signal?" Alaric asked. "She's going to drop her fan. When you see it hit the floor, that's your cue to approach." "A dropped fan. We're betting everything on a dropped fan. You have a better idea?" He didn't. That night, Alaric barely slept. He lay on the warehouse floor, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible variation of what could go wrong tomorrow. There were so many ways this could fail, so many moments where a single mistake would destroy everything. But there was also a path to victory. Narrow, dangerous, but real. He had to believe that. The day of the assembly arrived cold and gray. Alaric dressed in the servant's clothes, which fit poorly but served their purpose. Alara helped him with the final touches, a bit of ash rubbed into his hair to dull the color, a slight stoop to his posture that made him seem older and less significant. "You look terrible," she said, stepping back to examine him. "Perfect." They made their way to the palace separately, taking different routes. Alaric entered through the servants' entrance, joining the flow of staff preparing for the assembly. Nobody gave him a second look, just another body in brown livery, carrying linens, doing the invisible work that kept the palace running. The throne room was already filling up. Nobles in elaborate dress, merchants in their finest clothes, guards stationed at every entrance. The air hummed with conversation and barely suppressed ambition. Everyone wanted to be seen, to be noticed by the king or his advisors. Alaric wanted the opposite. He found a spot along the back wall, partially hidden behind a marble column, and waited. King Edris entered precisely on time, his arrival announced by trumpets. The crowd bowed. The king took his throne. Lord Harwick stood at his right hand, looking composed and confident. At the front of the room, Alaric spotted Percival standing with the other council members. His uncle's face was calm, but there was tension in his shoulders. He was watching the crowd, scanning faces, looking for threats. The assembly began with formal business. Reports from various duchy officials, updates on trade agreements, a petition from merchants complaining about tariffs, standard political theater, everyone performing their roles. Alaric waited, heart hammering. Then he saw Lady Ashford shuffle into the throne room, supported by a cane that she definitely didn't need. She was tiny, maybe 90 years old, dressed in about 17 layers of silk and lace that must have weighed more than she did. Guards nodded respectfully as she passed, not even attempting to search someone so obviously harmless. Alaric watched her make her way to a seat near the front, settling in with great ceremony. The satchel of documents was somewhere in those ridiculous skirts. The petitions continued. A dispute over water rights, a request for royal intervention in a boundary disagreement, boring procedural matters that made half the room fight to stay awake. Then Meredith stood up. She was seated with the other Vane family members, close enough to the throne to be heard clearly. When she rose, conversations died. People turned to look. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence, "I request permission to raise a matter of duchy security." Edris looked mildly interested. "Proceed, Lady Meredith." "I petition that Duke Alaric Vane be allowed to address this assembly on matters concerning the Eastern Reaches Duchy. It is his right, as a duke, to present concerns directly to the crown, and there are urgent issues that require your Majesty's attention." The room erupted in whispers. Percival stood immediately. "Your Majesty, Duke Vane is currently a fugitive from royal custody. He escaped 2 days ago and is wanted for questioning regarding multiple serious allegations. Granting this petition would be honoring a tradition that predates this kingdom's founding," Meredith interrupted, "unless your Majesty believes a duke's rights can be suspended without trial." It was a clever trap. Deny the petition and admit that ducal privileges meant nothing. Grant it and give Alaric a platform. Edris looked between them, clearly calculating. "The duke's current legal status complicates matters." "Then clarify his status," Meredith pressed. "Is he accused of a crime? Has he been formally charged? Or is he simply being held because it's convenient for certain people who'd prefer he didn't speak publicly?" "This is ridiculous," Percival said. "The girl is obviously helping her cousin evade justice. I'm exercising my right to petition the crown on behalf of a family member who has been denied due process." Meredith's voice rose. "If that's a crime, then arrest me too." but at least have the courage to admit you're imprisoning dukes without cause. The crowd was riveted now. This was better than any of the scripted petitions. This was real conflict, real stakes. King Edris held up a hand. Enough, both of you. He looked at Harwick, who leaned in to whisper something. The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Lady Meredith, Edris said finally, your petition is noted. However, given Duke Vane's absence, I'm not absent. Alaric's voice cut through the throne room like a blade. He stepped out from behind the column, shedding the servant's stoop, standing straight for the first time in 2 days. The crowd gasped. Guards moved toward him, but hesitated, unsure. Percival's face went white, then red. Seize him! On what charge? Alaric walked forward, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. I'm a duke addressing the king during assembly. Unless you're prepared to violate centuries of protocol, I have every right to be here. You're a fugitive. I'm a duke who was held without formal charges, escaped unlawful detention, and is now exercising my legal right to petition the crown. Alaric kept walking, the crowd parting before him. Or are you saying those rights don't apply to me? He reached Lady Ashford's seat. The old woman looked up at him with bright, mischievous eyes and dropped her fan. It hit the marble floor with a soft clatter. Alaric knelt to pick it up. When he stood, the satchel was in his other hand, passed so smoothly that most people didn't even notice. Thank you, my lady, he said. My pleasure, dear boy, she replied. Give them hell. Alaric turned to face the king. Your Majesty, I come before you today to present evidence of systematic corruption within my duchy council and your own administration, evidence of embezzlement, conspiracy, and murder committed by people who believed they were above the law. These are serious accusations, Edris said, his voice carefully neutral. They're documented facts. Alaric opened the satchel and pulled out the first contract. This is an agreement between Lord Percival Vane and Lord Harwick, signed 8 months ago to redirect duchy grain supplies for private profit. The shipments meant for the northern territories, the ones that disappeared, they didn't vanish. They were sold. And these men split the proceeds. He held up the contract for everyone to see. The room exploded. Nobles shouted questions. Guards looked to Harwick for orders that didn't come. Percival started toward Alaric but was blocked by the crowd pressing forward to see the documents. This is a forgery, Percival roared. A desperate fabrication by a mentally unstable. It's signed in your hand, Alaric interrupted, with Lord Harwick's countersignature, witnessed and dated, and it's just one of dozens. He pulled out more documents, holding them up. Letters discussing how to isolate me, contracts for illegal sales, records of payments made to silence witnesses, all of it authenticated by a clerk named Thomas Aldrich, who was murdered 2 days ago to keep him from testifying. Your Majesty, Harwick said, his calm finally cracking. These documents could easily be... Are you denying your signature? Alaric looked directly at the king's advisor. Because that's what you'd have to claim. That someone forged your handwriting well enough to fool experts. That every date, every reference, every detail is fabricated. Is that your position? Harwick's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Edris. The king's face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold. Lord Harwick, Edris said quietly, is that your signature? A pause that stretched for eternity. Your Majesty, the context of these documents. Is it your signature? Yes, but then explain it. Harwick looked trapped. Around the throne room, nobles were whispering, phones were being pulled out. No, wrong era, Alaric corrected himself. Scribes were writing frantically, recording every word for the official record. The grain redirection was a temporary measure, Harwick said, each word careful, due to concerns about supply security. The profits were meant to be returned to the treasury through private accounts. Alaric pulled out another document. This shows 200,000 crowns deposited into an account registered to a shell company, a company whose ownership traces back to Lord Percival's family interests. That's not treasury management. That's theft. You have no proof of ownership. I have a complete accounting trail. Thomas Aldrich spent 5 years documenting every transaction. Alaric turned to address the entire room. The conspiracy isn't just about money. It's about power. For years, the Duchy Council has operated as if I was a figurehead. They made decisions, moved funds, conducted business in my name without my knowledge or consent. And when I started asking questions, they tried to have me declared incompetent. When that didn't work fast enough, they tried to murder anyone who could corroborate my claims. He looked at Percival. Thomas Aldrich, the clerk at the Inkwell Scriptorium, burned alive because he kept records. And you ordered it, didn't you, Uncle? Just like you ordered my father's records destroyed after he died. Just like you've been controlling dukes for generations, making sure we never had real power. Percival's composure finally shattered. You ungrateful little. Everything I did was to protect this family. Your father was weak, couldn't make the hard decisions, and you're exactly like him. I kept the duchy running, kept us powerful, kept us relevant while you played at being noble. You stole from people who were starving, Alaric said quietly. You murdered anyone who threatened your control. And you call that protection? The throne room had gone completely silent. King Edris stood. Lord Harwick, Lord Percival, you will surrender yourselves to royal custody immediately. These allegations will be investigated fully, and if Duke Vane's evidence proves accurate, you will face charges of treason, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Your Majesty, Harwick started. Now. Guards moved forward, surrounding both men. Percival looked at Alaric with pure hatred, but he went quietly. Harwick maintained his dignity, but there was defeat in his eyes. They'd lost. Edris turned his attention to Alaric. Duke Vane, you've made extremely serious accusations in an extremely public manner. I assume you're prepared to substantiate all of them? Every word, Your Majesty. I have documentation, witness testimony, and a complete accounting of the conspiracy. It's all yours to examine. Then we will. But understand, if any of this proves false, if you've slandered these men without cause, the consequences will be severe. I understand. The king studied him for a long moment. You've changed, Duke Vane. The man who stood before me 3 days ago wouldn't have had the spine for this. 3 days ago, I was still trying to survive within their system. Now I'm trying to change it. Something that might have been approval flickered across Edris's face. We'll see if you succeed. This assembly is adjourned. Royal investigators will begin interviews immediately. He swept from the room, leaving chaos in his wake. Nobles surrounded Alaric, shouting questions, demanding details. Guards tried to maintain order. Lady Ashford cackled with delight from her seat. And through it all, Alaric stood at the center, still holding the satchel that had brought down an empire of corruption. Meredith pushed through the crowd and grabbed his arm. That was insane. It worked. Barely. If Harwick had been quicker, if Percival had kept his temper. But he didn't. They didn't. Alaric felt something loosening in his chest. Not quite relief. The investigation would take time, and there were still 100 ways this could go wrong, but something like hope. We got them, Meredith. Out in the open, on the record. They can't hide now. Alara appeared beside them, still in her plain clothes, looking exhausted but triumphant. The whole city's going to be talking about this by sunset. Good. Let them talk. Let everyone know what happened here. Alaric looked at the throne where the king had been sitting. For the first time in years, the truth matters more than politics. It wasn't over. The investigation would be brutal, would probably drag him through every decision he'd ever made as Duke. Percival and Harwick would fight back with lawyers and influence and every dirty trick they knew. The conspiracy's roots went deep, and pulling them out would be painful. But for the first time since his father died, Alaric felt like he had a chance to actually change something, to be more than just a title, to matter. What happens now? Meredith asked. Alaric looked at the documents in his hands, Thomas's legacy, a dead man's insurance policy that had finally paid out. Now we finish this. We find every person involved, expose every crime, burn the whole corrupt system down, and build something better in its place. That's ambitious. I'm feeling ambitious, Alara smiled. Then let's get to work. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, document review, interrogations that stretched late into the night. Royal investigators tore through duchy records like wolves through a henhouse, finding corruption in places even Alaric hadn't suspected. The conspiracy had roots that went back decades, layers upon layers of theft, manipulation, and control that had become so normalized nobody even questioned it anymore. Alaric spent most of those weeks in a secure wing of the palace, technically under protection, but practically under house arrest while the investigators verified his claims. He gave testimony for hours every day, walking them through every transaction, every suspicious decision, every moment when he'd felt controlled but couldn't prove it. Alara testified too, her voice steady as she described finding Thomas's body, escaping the fire, the years of tracking shipments that never quite went where they were supposed to. The investigators believed her because her records were meticulous, cross-referenced with customs logs and merchant receipts that couldn't be faked. Meredith faced her own interrogation, family members furious that she'd sided with Alaric, council members demanding to know what she'd known and when. She told them the truth with the kind of defiance that made Alaric proud to call her cousin. She'd chosen right over loyalty, and she wouldn't apologize for it. On the 17th day, the king's chief investigator, a severe woman named Catherine Marsh, who'd spent 30 years rooting out corruption, delivered her preliminary findings. Alaric sat in a conference room with King Edris, several royal advisors who'd replaced Harwick, and a scribe recording everything. Marsh laid out a folder thick enough to be a weapon. Your Majesty, Duke Vane's allegations are substantiated by the evidence. We've identified systematic embezzlement totaling 2.3 million crowns over the past 18 months, with patterns suggesting similar activity going back at least a decade. Lord Percival Vane and 16 other individuals were directly involved. Lord Harwick facilitated the conspiracy through his position, redirecting royal oversight and suppressing investigations. Idris's face was stone. 16 people, in my own administration. Yes, Your Majesty. Most were lower-level officials who handled paperwork and routing. But there are 3 nobles of rank who actively participated in the scheme. We have evidence they were paid a percentage of the stolen funds in exchange for political support and silence. Names. Marsh read them off. 2 were minor lords Alaric barely knew. The third was Lord Benedict, the family's legal advisor. Benedict had sat across from Alaric at council meetings for 10 years, offering careful legal advice, making sure everything was documented properly, and the whole time he'd been helping Percival steal millions. What about Thomas Aldrich's murder? Alaric asked. We have testimony from 3 witnesses who saw men in Vane family colors entering the scriptorium the night of the fire. One witness identified Lord Victor specifically. Percival admitted under questioning that he ordered the building burned, though he claims he didn't know Thomas was inside. That's a lie, Alaric said flatly. Thomas was the target. Everything else was just making it look like an accident. Likely, but proving murder versus manslaughter will be difficult without direct evidence. Marsh looked at him. However, the conspiracy and embezzlement charges are ironclad. Combined with the attempted cover-up, we're recommending treason charges for all primary conspirators. The room went quiet. Treason carried a death sentence. Your Majesty, Alaric said carefully, I want justice, not revenge. These men stole and murdered, but they're your family. Idris finished. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. And you're wondering if mercy is appropriate. I'm wondering if execution solves anything. They should face consequences, lose their positions, pay restitution. But killing them just creates martyrs. Makes me look vindictive. It makes you look weak, one of the advisors interjected. If you don't demand the harshest penalty, people will think you're soft on corruption. Let them think that. I'd rather be called soft than become the kind of person who executes family members for political advantage. Idris studied him for a long moment. You've changed, Duke Vane. The man who escaped from my palace 3 weeks ago wouldn't have argued for leniency. That man was running on anger and desperation. I've had time to think. Alaric met the king's eyes. I want to rebuild the duchy properly. Clean out the corruption, yes, but also create systems that prevent it from happening again. That doesn't start with executions. It starts with accountability. Accountability without teeth is just words. Then give it teeth. Strip their titles, seize their assets, ban them from holding office ever again. Make it clear that corruption has real consequences, but don't make me the duke who had his uncle hanged. The king was silent for a long time. Investigator Marsh, Edris said finally, prepare formal charges for all conspirators. Treason, embezzlement, obstruction of justice. But note in your recommendation that Duke Vane has requested consideration of clemency in sentencing. The final decision will be made after trial, but his input will be weighed. Yes, Your Majesty. And Duke Vane, Edris's expression was unreadable. You'll testify at those trials, every single one of them. The court needs to hear directly from you what these men did and how it affected your ability to govern. No more hiding behind investigators or written statements. Face them yourself. Alaric felt his stomach clench, but he nodded. I will. Good. Because this isn't over. The trials will be public, vicious. Your family will fight back with everything they have left. And half the court will be watching to see if you're strong enough to follow through or if you'll crack under pressure. I won't crack. We'll see. The trials began 4 weeks after the assembly. The throne room had been converted into a courtroom, with the king presiding as chief judge and a panel of neutral magistrates hearing evidence. It was the biggest legal proceeding in decades. Nobles crammed into every available seat, scribes recording every word, artists sketching the key moments for distribution throughout the kingdom. Percival was tried first. He entered the courtroom wearing plain clothes instead of family colors, looking older than Alaric remembered. When their eyes met across the room, Percival's expression was complicated. Anger, yes, but also something that might have been regret. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Documents showing Percival's signature on illegal contracts. Testimony from merchants who'd bought the stolen grain. Financial records proving the money had flowed through accounts he controlled. Percival's defense argued that he'd acted within his authority as council head, that the reallocations were standard practice, that Alaric had been an absent duke who'd left them no choice but to manage affairs themselves. Then Alaric took the stand. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Garrett, led him through the testimony. Duke Vane, when did you first suspect irregularities in your duchy accounts? About 6 months ago. Small things at first. Payments that seemed excessive, supplies that never arrived. I asked the council about them, and Lord Percival assured me everything was properly documented. Did you believe him? I wanted to. He was family, someone my father had trusted. Alaric kept his voice steady. But the irregularities kept happening, and when I pushed for independent audits, he found reasons to delay them. What changed? I realized I was being managed. Every question I asked was deflected. Every concern was explained away. I wasn't being consulted, I was being controlled, and when I tried to break free of that control, the conspiracy moved to destroy me. Garrett pulled out one of the contracts. Did you authorize this grain sale? No. Did you profit from it? No. Did you even know it happened until you found these records? No. I signed shipping orders for the Northern Territories. Lord Percival and his associates rerouted those shipments and pocketed the profits. Then they blamed me when the Northerners complained about not receiving aid. Why would they do that? Alaric looked directly at Percival. Because as long as I looked incompetent, they kept control. A weak duke was easier to manage than a strong one, so they made sure I stayed weak. Percival's lawyer objected, claiming speculation. The judge overruled it. The testimony continued for hours. Alaric walked them through every manipulation, every half-truth, every moment when he'd been made to feel like the problem instead of the solution. When it was Percival's lawyer's turn to cross-examine, the man tried to paint Alaric as paranoid and vengeful. Isn't it true, Duke Vane, that you've struggled with the responsibilities of your position? I've struggled with being undermined at every turn, yes. And isn't it possible that Lord Percival was simply trying to help you, by stealing millions of crowns and setting me up to take the blame? That's an interesting definition of help. Your Grace, there's no need for sarcasm. And there's no need to pretend my uncle was acting in my interest when the evidence proves otherwise. The exchange went back and forth, but Alaric held his ground. He wasn't the uncertain duke anymore, the one who doubted himself, who let others speak for him. He knew what had happened. He had proof. And he wasn't backing down. When the verdict came, it was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing happened the next day. The prosecution asked for execution. The defense pleaded for mercy, citing Percival's years of service to the crown, his age, his family. Alaric was asked to give a statement. He stood before the court, looking at his uncle, and said what he'd been planning to say for weeks. Lord Percival Vane controlled my life for 10 years. He made decisions in my name, spent my duchy's money, and manipulated me into believing I was the problem. He stole from people who were suffering, and when I tried to stop him, he tried to destroy me. Percival stared at the floor, but executing him won't undo any of that. It won't return the stolen money or bring back Thomas Aldrich. It'll just make me the duke who killed his own family, and I refuse to let this conspiracy define me that way. He turned to face the king. I ask the court to show mercy in sentencing. Strip him of his titles, seize his assets, imprison him if you must, but let him live. Let him face the consequences of what he's done without making him a martyr." The courtroom erupted in whispers. King Edris raised a hand for silence. "The court will deliberate and deliver sentence tomorrow." The next day, Percival was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, forfeiture of all titles and property, and permanent banishment from holding any position of authority. Not death, but not freedom either. Victor and Benedict received similar sentences. Lord Harwick, as the king's advisor who'd betrayed his trust, got 30 years plus complete disgrace. The other conspirators faced lesser charges: fines, short prison terms, loss of positions. Enough to hurt, not enough to destroy. And through it all, Alaric testified, answered questions, faced the people who'd controlled him and told the truth about what they'd done. It was exhausting, painful. Several times he wanted to walk away, let the investigators handle it, go back to being invisible. But he didn't, because this was what taking power actually meant. Not just challenging the conspiracy, but seeing it through to the end, facing the consequences, rebuilding from the ashes. 6 weeks after the trials ended, Alaric stood in his father's study, his study now, he corrected himself, and looked at the changes he'd made. The heavy curtains were gone, replaced with ones that actually let in light. The old desk was still there, but the drawers were empty of his father's papers. New furniture arranged for actual work instead of intimidation. Books on governance and reform instead of dusty legal texts nobody read. A knock at the door. Alara entered, carrying a folder. "The new council has their first meeting in an hour," she said. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Alaric took the folder. Agenda items for restructuring the duchy administration. "Still can't believe you agreed to this." "Someone has to make sure you don't immediately get manipulated again." She smiled. "Besides, Chief Administrative Officer has a nice ring to it." After the trials, Alaric had dissolved the old council entirely. Not just removed the conspirators, but eliminated the whole structure that had enabled them. In its place, he'd created something new. Positions based on merit instead of family connections. Transparent oversight. Multiple people checking each other's work instead of a single point of control. Alara had been his first appointment. Her experience tracking corruption, combined with her complete lack of interest in politics for its own sake, made her perfect for keeping the new administration honest. Meredith was his second, liaison to the noble families, someone who understood their world but wouldn't be controlled by it. She'd accepted with enthusiasm that bordered on glee, particularly since it meant getting to tell certain family members exactly where they could shove their objections. The rest of the council was a mix of competent administrators, reformed bureaucrats who'd been sidelined by the old guard, and a few young nobles who actually seemed to care about good governance instead of just accumulating power. It wasn't perfect. Some of them were still learning. Others brought their own biases and agendas. But at least they were Alaric's choices, people he'd selected because they were good at their jobs, not because family tradition demanded it. "The Northern Territories are receiving their grain shipments," Alara said, reviewing the folder. "Full amounts, delivered on schedule. People are noticing." "Good. That's how it should have been all along." "The Treasury audit is complete too. We recovered about 40% of the stolen funds. The rest was spent or hidden too well to trace. But 40% is better than nothing." "What are we doing with it?" "Infrastructure projects, the Eastern Bridge that never got built, medical clinics in the southern coast, things that should have been funded 3 years ago if your uncle hadn't been stealing the money." Alaric felt something settle in his chest. Actual progress. Real change. Not just exposing corruption, but fixing what it had broken. "There's one more thing," Alara said, her tone shifting. "A letter arrived this morning. No signature, but the handwriting matches the anonymous warning you got before everything started." She handed him an envelope. Alaric opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, the same precise handwriting. "Duke Vane, congratulations on your victory. You've proven stronger than many predicted and wiser than most hoped. The kingdom is better for it. But understand, what you faced was one conspiracy. There are others. Deeper networks, older families, systems of power that have existed for generations. You've disrupted one piece of the machinery. The rest continues to turn. Stay vigilant, trust carefully, And remember that power is not something you win once and keep forever. It must be maintained, defended, rebuilt constantly. The hardest part is not seizing control. It's using it well. A friend who will remain anonymous. Alaric read it twice, then set it down. Do you know who this is? Alar asked. No, someone in the court, obviously. Someone with access to information and their own agenda. He looked at the letter again. But they're not wrong. This isn't over. There are still people out there who don't like what I've done, who want things to go back to how they were. So what do? We keep working, keep fixing things. Show them that the new way is better than the old way. Alaric stood, straightening his coat. And we stay ready for the next fight, because there will be one. You sound almost eager for it. Not eager, just not afraid anymore. He smiled slightly. That's new for me. They walked together to the council chamber. The hallways felt different now, still the same marble and columns, but Alaric moved through them with purpose instead of dread. He wasn't being summoned to explain himself. He was going to lead. The new council was already assembled when he arrived, 12 people instead of the old council's 6, representing different areas of expertise instead of just family interests. They stood when he entered, a sign of respect he was still getting used to. Please sit. Alaric took his seat at the head of the table. We have a lot to cover today. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They discussed grain distribution, tax reform, corruption prevention measures. People disagreed, sometimes loudly. Alara and a magistrate named Rollins got into a heated debate about oversight procedures that made several others uncomfortable. Alaric loved it. This was what a council should be, people arguing about the best way to solve problems, not plotting how to maintain control. Disagreement in service of actually making things better, not political maneuvering for its own sake. When the meeting ended, Meredith hung back while the others filed out. How does it feel? She asked. Overwhelming, terrifying, right. Alaric gathered his notes. I keep waiting for someone to walk in and tell me I'm doing it wrong. You probably are doing some things wrong. That's how learning works. She sat on the edge of the table. But you're also doing a lot of things right. The duchy's functioning better than it has in decades. People are noticing. Even the families who hated you for bringing down Percival are starting to grudgingly admit that maybe you know what you're doing. Only grudgingly? You destroyed a power structure that benefited them. They're not going to love you for it overnight. Meredith grinned. But they're scared of you now. That's almost better. I don't want them scared. I want them working with me. Then you're more optimistic than I am. But we'll see. She stood to leave, then paused. Father would be proud of you, you know, if he could see what you've done. Alaric felt his throat tighten. You think so? I know so. He wanted the duchy to be better. Tried to change it himself, but got overwhelmed by the council, just like you did. The difference is, you didn't let them win. She touched his shoulder. That's what he would have wanted. Someone strong enough to break the cycle. After she left, Alaric sat alone in the council chamber for a while, thinking about his father. About the weight of the ducal ring, the title he'd never wanted but had finally learned to carry. He'd spent 10 years trying to survive, trying to not fail too badly, to not embarrass the family, to just get through each day without everything falling apart. Now he was trying to actually succeed, to build something, to use power instead of being used by it. It was harder than surviving had been, more exhausting, more complicated, more likely to fail spectacularly. But it mattered in a way that survival never had. That evening, Alaric walked through the palace gardens as the sun set. The geometric precision was the same as always, every hedge trimmed, every path measured. But he saw it differently now, not as a cage designed to make him feel small, as a space he could reshape. He found King Edris there, sitting on a bench near the fountain, alone except for 2 discreet guards. Your Majesty. Duke Vane, join me. Alaric sat. For a while, neither spoke. You've made quite a mess of my court, Edris said finally. I've cleaned up quite a mess in your court. Same difference. The king smiled slightly. Half my advisors are terrified of you now. They think you'll come after them next. Only if they're corrupt. And how many of them do you think are completely clean? Edris turned to look at him. This is politics, Alaric. Everyone has dirt. Everyone makes compromises. The question is how much dirt and what kind of compromises. Then help me change that. Make the system better instead of accepting it as broken. You're young. You think systems can be fixed. Edris looked back at the fountain. I used to think that too. Then I realized that systems exist because people want them to. Change the rules and people just find new ways to work around them. Human nature doesn't reform. Maybe not, but we can make corruption harder instead of easier, require transparency instead of hiding everything in shadows, punish theft instead of protecting thieves because they're well connected. And what happens when you discover that someone you trust is also compromised? When the idealistic young nobles on your new council turn out to have their own schemes, then I deal with it, but I don't give up before trying. Edris was quiet for a long moment. You've surprised me, Duke Vane. I thought you'd break under pressure. Thought Percival would destroy you and I'd have to intervene to keep the duchy stable. Instead, you destroyed him. Publicly. Thoroughly. With respect, Your Majesty, I had help. People who believed in doing the right thing even when it was dangerous. Alara Quinn, Meredith Vane, Lady Ashford, who apparently has been waiting decades for an excuse to smuggle evidence into my throne room. Edris smiled. You built yourself an interesting coalition. I built myself allies instead of trying to control everyone. Turns out that works better. We'll see. Alliances are fragile things. People's loyalties shift. Then I'll earn their loyalty every day instead of demanding it by right of title. The king stood looking down at him. Continue with your reforms, your new council, your transparency measures, your optimistic belief that people can be better. But do it carefully. There are forces in this kingdom that don't like change, and they're better at this game than you are. I'm learning. Quickly, I hope. Edris started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. Harwick's trial revealed that he'd been manipulating me for years, feeding me incomplete information, controlling which advisors I spoke with, essentially making my decisions for me while I thought I was ruling. Do you know how that feels? Alaric met his eyes. Yes, Your Majesty, I do. Then you understand why I'm grateful you exposed it, and why I'm also deeply furious that it happened in the first place. Edris's expression was hard. Don't ever lie to me, Duke Vane. Don't manipulate me. Don't try to control what information reaches me. I've had enough of advisors who thought they knew better than their king. I won't, Your Majesty. You have my word. Good. Because the next person who tries will face worse than Harwick did. He left, guards following. Alaric sat alone in the garden as night fell, thinking about power and trust and the weight of promises. 3 months ago, he'd been a controlled duke who signed what he was told and didn't ask questions. Now he was someone the king trusted, or at least trusted more than the alternatives. Someone who'd proven he could fight back, could expose corruption, could follow through. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like responsibility, the kind that didn't end when the trials were over, the kind that would follow him for the rest of his life. 6 months after the trials, Alaric attended a ceremony in the Northern Territories. The grain storage facilities had been rebuilt, properly funded this time, designed to handle the supplies that now arrived on schedule. Local officials gave speeches thanking him for the support. Children performed a traditional harvest song. It was political theater, but the kind that actually mattered. After the ceremony, an old farmer approached him. Your Grace, I wanted to thank you, personal-like. For what? For caring. For making sure the food got here instead of getting stolen. The farmer's weathered face was serious. We heard what happened in the capital, how you stood up to your own family to make sure we didn't starve. That takes courage. I was just doing my job. No, Your Grace. Lots of nobles do their job. Send the supplies, tick the box, move on. You fought for us, risked everything to make sure we got what we needed. He gripped Alaric's hand. That's not duty. That's giving a damn, and we won't forget it. Alaric didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, throat tight. Later, standing on a hill overlooking the territories, Alara joined him. You look contemplative, she said. I'm thinking about how different this looks now. 6 months ago, these people were suffering because of corruption I didn't even know existed. Now they're thriving, because we exposed that corruption and fixed it. We did good work. We did. But there's so much more to do. Other territories, other problems, other conspiracies we haven't uncovered yet. He looked at her. Does it ever feel like too much? Every day. But then I remember what it was like before. When people like Thomas documented crimes, but nothing ever changed because the powerful protected each other. Now we're at least trying to break that cycle. That's worth the exhaustion. I hope so. I know so. Alaric smiled. Besides, you're stuck with it now. Can't go back to being the controlled Duke even if you wanted to. Too many people are watching to make sure you stay the reformer who fights corruption instead of hiding from it. No pressure. All the pressure. But you can handle it. They stood together watching the sun set over the territories, and Alaric felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. There would always be fights ahead, conspiracies to expose, systems to reform. But peace with who he'd become, with the choices he'd made, with the path he was walking. He wasn't his father, trying desperately to survive a role that crushed him. He wasn't Percival, controlling others to maintain power. He was Duke Alaric Vane, flawed and uncertain and still learning, but fighting to make things better instead of accepting them as broken. That would have to be enough. Back in the capital, the palace continued its endless dance of politics and power. Nobles schemed, advisors maneuvered, factions formed and reformed. But in the eastern wing, in rooms that had once been his father's prison, Alaric built something different. A duchy administration that valued competence over connections. A council that argued about solutions instead of maintaining control. A system that wasn't perfect, wasn't even close to perfect, but was at least trying to be better than what came before. And at the center of it all stood a duke who'd learned that power wasn't something you survived. It was something you earned, maintained, and used to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The conspiracy was broken, the corrupt council was gone, the thieves faced consequences. But more importantly, the northern territories received their grain. The southern coast got its medical clinics. The eastern bridge was finally being built. Real people saw real improvements in their lives because Alaric had chosen to fight instead of hide. That was the victory that mattered. Not defeating Percival, not exposing Harwick, not even reforming the system, which would take years and might never fully succeed, but proving that it was possible to fight back, that controlled dukes could become free, that corruption could be challenged even when it seemed invincible. One evening, Alaric found another anonymous letter waiting on his desk. Duke Vane, you've accomplished more in 6 months than most dukes manage in a lifetime. The kingdom has noticed. More importantly, the people have noticed. There will be other battles, other conspiracies, other moments when you'll be tempted to take the easy path instead of the right one. The hardest test is not the first fight. It's staying true to your principles when maintaining them becomes inconvenient. But I believe you'll pass that test, because you've already proven something most nobles never learn. Power is not about control. It's about responsibility. Use it well. Your anonymous ally. Alaric set down the letter and looked around his study. At the changes he'd made, the council he'd built, the duchy he was slowly reshaping into something his father would have been proud of. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was his, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. Outside, the palace glittered in the night. Inside, a duke who'd once been controlled sat at his desk and planned for tomorrow. Not just surviving anymore. Building, fighting, leading. The duke who'd been a prisoner in his own life had become the duke who set himself free, and in doing so had given others the courage to do the same. The conspiracy was ended. The Reformation had begun. And Duke Alaric Vane, once powerless, now powerful, stood ready for whatever came next.